Welcome to the Grace Totem podcast. Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channel and drop that like button. With no further delays, let us dive into our next topic with our hosts.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on something you probably have in your kitchen right now. Salt.
Just salt, yeah.
But trust me, we're about to unpack its surprisingly rich, multifaceted meaning, especially in religious texts, traditions.
We're looking mainly at Christian and Jewish perspectives today based on the sources we've gathered.
Exactly. For many, it's just, a seasoning.
Right, makes food taste better. But our mission here in this deep dive is to go way beyond the shaker and reveal the really profound symbolic roles this seemingly simple stuff has played.
And we've got quite the collection of materials, haven't we?
We do. Ancient scriptures, theological commentaries, bits of history, even some modern online chats. It all helps unpack why salt carries such weight.
And for you listening in, if you're curious, want to get knowledgeable quickly but thoroughly.
Looking for those aha moments.
Exactly.
Right.
Without feeling overwhelmed, this is your express lane. Think of this as our chat that'll hopefully illuminate why something so basic holds such, significance. Okay, let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe that key concept.
Let's start with the covenant of salt. It's a specific phrase, pops up a few times in the Old Testament.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is how its meaning sort of expands each time it appears.
Right, so the first one is Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13.
That's it. Salt is required for grain offerings. Actually, all your offerings, it says.
And it calls it the salt of the covenant. Sounds pretty essential for their worship, non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Then jump over to Numbers 18.1 team. God gives the heave offerings. Those are parts of sacrifices for the priests, basically.
Right.
Their share. Yeah. He gives them as a covenant of salt forever. So here it's signifying God's lasting, reliable provision for them. It's about sustenance.
Okay, so from offerings to provision, and then it gets even broader.
It does. Look at 2 Chronicles 13.5. Here it says, God gave the kingship over Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt.
Wow. So it's not just temple rituals anymore. It's about leadership, the whole nation's future.
Exactly. It suggests something unbreakable, everlasting. That lasting quality of salt really helped people grasp the nature of God's promises.
And there's that story too, isn't there? The battle.
Yes, same chapter in 2 Chronicles, Abijah of Judah versus Jeroboam of Israel.
Abijah's way outnumbered.
Heavily outnumbered, but he invokes this covenant of salt, and guess what? Judah wins decisively.
So it shows how much power, how much importance they placed on this covenant idea.
Definitely. It wasn't just words. It was seen as having real weight.
Okay, now this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. You connect this Old Testament foundation to Jesus' words in Matthew 5:4-33.
Yeah.
You are the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Suddenly you realize his listeners probably got the weight of that metaphor instantly.
They would have. This whole idea of salt being tied to enduring covenants, to permanence, it was already there, deep-seated.
It's fascinating how that Old Testament concept just flows right into Jesus' teaching. So what was it about salt itself? What properties made it such a good symbol for a covenant?
Well, several things. First, the obvious one, preservation.
Right. Stopping food going bad, preventing decay, corruption.
Exactly. And that directly speaks to the idea of God's promises being enduring, incorruptible. They don't decay.
That makes total sense. And it lasts, right? Salt itself is pretty stable.
Very stable. It doesn't just break down easily. So that suggests steadfastness, stability, permanence, all things you want in a covenant.
And purity, was that part of it?
Yes, definitely. Salt was seen as a pure substance. And there's an interesting mystical take, too, from Rabbeinu Bahaya.
Okay, Kabbalah.
Yes, a key figure in Jewish mysticism. He saw salt as embodying both the power of water, which he linked to compassion,
Okay.
and the power of fire representing justice.
Water and fire, compassion and justice, in salt.
Yeah, the idea being maybe that covenants, even strong agreements, need a balance. They need both unwavering justice and compassionate understanding. Sometimes compromise, maybe. It's a nuanced view.
That's quite a layer. Okay, so we've got the foundation, the covenant of salt. How did this translate into actual practice, like in the offerings?
Well, back to Leviticus 2.13. It explicitly commands seasoning all grain offerings with salt.
The salt of the covenant of your God. Can't leave it out.
Exactly, a non-negotiable. And theologically, this wasn't just, for flavor.
Right, it meant something.
It symbolized that preservation and purity we talked about linked to God's covenant, and it underscored the need for holiness in worship, a constant physical reminder of their commitment.
Like sealing the deal almost with every offering. And the sources mention it made the offerings more pleasing.
Yes, reflecting sincere, wholehearted worship, not just ticking a box, like you said.
It's interesting to contrast that with what wasn't allowed, like leaven.
Symbolizing sins
or
honey.
Why no honey?
Well, honey was often used in pagan rituals, sometimes seen as a way to sort of manipulate or falsely appease gods. Think temporary sweetness versus the enduring quality of salt.
Ah, okay. And Spurgeon, the preacher, he had a lot to say about this verse, didn't he?
He really did. He stressed that even small details, like adding salt, matter hugely in serving God. Follow the commands precisely.
Don't pick and choose what seems important.
Right. And he pulled out several layers of symbolism for salt here. First, the covenant itself, unchangeable, incorruptible, reminding believers about the covenant of grace through Christ when they approach God.
Okay, covenant. What else?
Communion. Salt fosters fellowship with God. It ensures service is done in his spirit, not just mechanically.
A genuine connection.
Yeah. And then sincerity. This is a big one for Spurgeon.
Okay.
He talks about the need for genuine, truthful devotion. He contrasts the necessary sharpness of salt with what he called honey drop godliness.
Honey drop godliness.
Yeah, basically being unwilling to confront sin, always wanting things to be sweet and easy. Salt, he says, sometimes has to bite. It requires honesty.
That's powerful. And the last one?
Purifying power. Salt represents the need for holiness, for actively driving out corruption, both in the believer's life and in their influence on the world.
So it's not just internal, it's about outward impact too.
Absolutely. It's about how you live your whole life, which, brings us right back to Jesus' metaphor.
You are the salt of the earth, Matthew 5:32.
Exactly. Knowing all that Old Testament background really, really deepens what Jesus was saying there, right after the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount.
It hits differently, doesn't it? And it works on so many levels. The first one is preservation, right?
Yeah, the most obvious one. Just like salt stopped food spoiling, super important before fridges.
Critical, yeah.
Believers are meant to be agents preventing spiritual, moral decay in the world.
And didn't one source mention Magdala, near where Jesus taught?
Yes. Known for its fish curing industry. So that image of preserving fish with salt would have been very vivid, very real for his audience.
Okay, so preservation, what's another layer?
Flavoring. Believers bringing the taste of heaven to earth.
Enhancing the good, counteracting bitterness.
Exactly, reflecting Christ's influence through them, actively making the world better, not just, avoiding the bad.
And value. Salt was valuable, wasn't it?
Hugely valuable. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. That's where we get the word salary.
No kidding. Salary from salt?
Yeah. So it suggests believers are precious, valued by God. They have inherent worth.
But then there's the warning.
Yes. The warning. What if salt loses its saltiness?
It's useless, right? Thrown out.
Pretty much. It speaks to the possibility of believers losing their influence, their purpose, if they don't actually live out the kingdom values. If the salt gets impure, adulterated, it's worthless.
Which connects to needing courage, right?
Yeah.
Speaking out against injustice, working for good.
Yes. Thinkers like Luther, Thielich, they talked about the biting quality of real Christian witness. It's not always comfortable. It shouldn't always be comfortable.
It's not just about being nice.
No. And our sources remind us that good deeds include proclaiming truth, belief, confession, teaching alongside acts of kindness. It's the whole package.
So being salt is quite demanding. It's not passive.
Not at all.
Okay, so beyond that main metaphor, salt pops up elsewhere too. Like Lot's wife.
Right, turning into a pillar of salt, generally seen as a symbol of desolation, maybe divine judgment, a very different feel to the covenant salt.
A stark contrast. And Mark 9:49.
Everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt.
Fire and salt together.
Yeah, suggesting maybe trials, tribulations act as a kind of spiritual refinement, a preserving process, perhaps.
Interesting. And Colossians, about speech.
Colossians 4:6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt.
Meaning our words should be.
Pure, flavorful, maybe constructive, edifying, having a positive impact, not bland, not corrupting.
So it really has this dual nature, commitment, preservation, goodness.
And on the other hand, desolation, judgment, barrenness.
Like Abimelech sowing salt on that city in Judges.
Exactly, to make sure nothing would ever grow there again. Total destruction. It's fascinating how one substance holds both meanings.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Beyond the actual scriptures, how did salt function in the wider ancient world? Its cultural weight must have played a role.
Absolutely. It was essential for diet, obviously, but also huge in trade, used as currency, like we mentioned with salary.
And the phrase not worth his salt comes from that too.
Precisely. It was also linked to friendship, hospitality, making deep connections. Sharing salt could signify a bond.
And hygiene.
Yeah.
Even warding off evil.
Yeah, used for cleaning, and some ancient beliefs did associate it with protection against malevolent forces. And remember, biblical salt wasn't our pure table salt.
Right. Unrefined. Had other minerals in it.
Probably looked and tasted quite different.
Yeah.
Which brings us to something like blessed salt.
Yeah. That's used in some Christian traditions.
Particularly Catholicism. It's considered a sacramental used for protection against evil.
But how does that square with contemporary Christian thought? We looked at that online discussion.
Right, that Reddit thread. The general vibe there was caution against superstition.
Leaning more towards faith in Christ is the real protection, not relying on objects.
Exactly, an emphasis on trust in God rather than attributing power to salt itself.
Okay. One last really interesting connection. The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Found near the Dead Sea, which is, of course, incredibly salty.
And one scroll in particular, the Temple Scroll, had amazing preservation.
It did. And analysis showed it had this unusual mineral coating. It contained salt, but the minerals weren't from the Dead Sea.
Suggesting what? Advanced techniques?
Seems like it. Sophisticated ways of preparing the parchment using this mineral mix, including salt, to preserve it.
But ironically,
That same mineral coating is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture.
the thing that preserved it for centuries.
Yeah, that makes it vulnerable to humidity changes. It needs careful environmental control because of the coating that saved it. A bit of a twist.
Wow. Okay, so as we kind of wrap this up, it's clear salt is way more than just salt.
So much more than a condiment, yeah. It's this incredibly potent symbol woven all through these texts and traditions.
Absolutely. We've seen it representing covenant, purity, preservation, flavor, sincerity.
And the believer's role, their influence in the world.
That call from Jesus, you are the salt of the earth, it really lands with force now, doesn't it?
It really does. A charge to live lives that actively preserve good, bring that flavor of Christ to everyone around us.
So maybe a final thought for you, listening. How does this deeper understanding of salt change how you see your own commitments?
Yeah, your commitments to faith, to people, to the world.
What does it mean for you personally today to have salt in yourselves, as Mark's gospel puts it, in your daily life, your interactions?
Definitely something to let simmer, as you said earlier.
Good one. Thanks for unpacking all that.
My pleasure. Fascinating stuff.
And here wraps the episode of the Grace Totem podcast. If you've liked the content, please make sure you drop that like button. Stay tuned with us as we deep dive into the topics, unpacking and unraveling them by subscribing to our channel and clicking on the bell icon so that you get notified when we post new content. Thank you for listening to us. See you soon.